I never thought I'd be that person, the one who writes a long emotional post about falling in love with her neighbor. But here I am sitting in my half-unpacked living room with a cup of lukewarm tea and a heart that won't calm down. When I moved into this little yellow house 3 months ago, I wasn't expecting much. I just wanted a quiet place, away from the noise of my old apartment and the constant hum of other people's lives. The house isn't perfect: creaky floors, slightly crooked windows, a stubborn front door that needs a push with the hip, but it feels like mine. Like a place I could build something new. It was the kind of late spring morning that smells like cut grass and warm air when I first arrived. I remember standing on the porch, boxes piled up around me, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. My phone buzzed every few minutes with messages from friends asking if I needed help, but I wanted to do this alone. I wanted the moment to belong entirely to me. Then, as I was wrestling a bookshelf through the front gate, I saw him for the first time. He was across the narrow street, kneeling in his garden, wearing a gray t-shirt and looking like he'd stepped out of some soft indie film, quiet, self-contained, sun in his hair. He looked up at the sound of my cursing. The bookshelf and I were not on good terms, and our eyes met. He smiled, small, polite, but it reached his eyes. I smiled back, flustered, muttered something like hi, and kept dragging the bookshelf inside. I didn't think much of it then. He was just the neighbor. At least that's what I told myself. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds and the faint clink of metal from outside. Still half asleep, I peeked through my curtains and saw him again. My neighbor. He was fixing something on his fence, sleeves rolled up, completely absorbed in the task. The early sunlight caught on his hair, and I remember thinking that he looked like someone who belonged in quiet mornings like this. I made myself coffee and stood on the porch, pretending to check my phone, mostly just watching him work. It felt a little ridiculous. I barely knew his name, but something about him pulled my attention in that soft, unexplainable way some people do. He noticed me after a moment and straightened up, giving that same polite smile as yesterday. "Good morning," he called across the fence. "Morning," I said, clutching my mug like it was a microphone. "You're up early." He shrugged. A little bashful. "Can't sleep past 7. Old habit, I guess." I laughed, more loudly than necessary, and he smiled again, that quiet kind of smile that doesn't need words. Then he walked over, brushing dust off his hands, and leaned lightly on the fence. "I'm Elias," he said. I told him my name, and something about saying it out loud to someone new felt like pressing reset on my whole life. We chatted for a few minutes. Nothing deep, just the kind of small talk that fills the air between strangers trying to sound casual. He asked if I needed any help unpacking, and I, determined to appear capable, said no. But he noticed the half-built shelf behind me through the open door and grinned. "If that thing collapses, I have a toolbox," he offered. I told him I might take him up on that, and he nodded once, like he genuinely meant it. Then he went back to his fence, and I stood there for a while, pretending to sip cold coffee, feeling strangely lighter. It wasn't much, a few words over a fence, but it was the first real conversation I'd had in this new place, and somehow, it already felt like a beginning. It started with little things. A wave when I came home from work, a nod when he saw me watering the potted herbs I was trying and mostly failing to keep alive. Sometimes when I'd forget to bring in my mail, I'd find it tucked neatly by my door with a yellow sticky note that said, "Didn't want it to blow away." It was all so subtle that I might have missed it if I weren't looking for it. Or maybe I wanted to find something there. One Sunday morning, I was kneeling on the porch floor, assembling a table I'd bought online, and predictably, the screws refused to cooperate. I muttered a few creative words under my breath, and before I knew it, Elias appeared beside the railing with a small toolbox in hand. "Didn't I warn you about furniture rebellion?" he said, his tone dry but gentle. I laughed and admitted defeat.
You did. Guess I'm not much of a handyman.
He crouched beside me, his movements precise and patient, the way people move when they're used to fixing things quietly. We talked while he worked, about small safe things, a mess.
The neighborhood. The weather.
My weird job working remotely for a design firm. He told me he was a carpenter, which made sense. His hands looked like they knew the language of wood and tools. At some point, as he tightened the last screw, our fingers brushed, just lightly, but it felt like an entire second of silence, a soft current running between us. He didn't pull away right away, and neither did I. When he finally did, He smiled in that understated way again.
There. Stable now.
Thank you, I said, trying not to sound like my pulse was in my throat. He nodded, stood up, and looked at me for a moment like he wanted to say something else, but then just said, "Anytime," and walked back across the street. That night, I caught myself looking out the window at the faint glow of his living room light, and for the first time since moving here, I realized I wasn't lonely. After that, things started to fall into a quiet rhythm, not rushed, not forced, just easy. We began to see each other more often in ways that felt almost accidental at first. I'd be leaving for groceries, and he'd happen to be out walking his dog. I didn't even know he had one until then. A lazy golden retriever named Taffy who adored everyone but clearly loved Elias best. Sometimes he'd wave me over to try whatever he was grilling in his backyard. Taste tester privileges, he called it, and I'd bring over a bottle of wine in exchange. Before long, it became a thing. Thursday evenings after work, 2 chairs under the string lights in his yard, quiet laughter mixing with the smell of cedar and smoke. We started trading stories. I learned he'd lived there for 4 years, that he built furniture in his garage for clients who preferred things made by hand. He told me about his sister who lived across the country and sent him postcards from every new city she visited. He, in turn, listened, really listened, when I talked about my move, about how I'd been trying to rebuild my life after a messy breakup and a job that had drained me dry. Most people offer comfort in words, but Elias did it in silence, a kind of presence that made everything I said feel safe to share. One evening, as I was leaving, he handed me something small, a wooden keychain shaped like a tiny house. "Made this from leftover oak," he said. "Thought it might suit your new place." It wasn't extravagant, just smooth and warm to the touch, but something about it made my chest tighten. I hung it on my keys that same night. It was the first gift I'd received that didn't feel like an obligation, just a quiet gesture that said, "I see you. I want you to feel at home here." And somewhere in those weeks of easy conversations and small kindnesses, I realized that Elias wasn't just my neighbor anymore. He was becoming part of the reason I loved waking up here. It happened so suddenly that I still replay it in my head, trying to figure out where things slipped. One rainy evening, after a long, frustrating day at work, I came home to find a delivery box sitting on my porch, drenched corner torn open. It was the new lamp I'd ordered, the one I'd been oddly excited about. Before I could even process the soggy mess, Elias appeared, holding an umbrella over both of us. "I saw the delivery guy drop it off earlier," he said. "I meant to cover it, but's fine." I cut him off sharper than I meant to. "It's not your responsibility." He blinked, a little taken aback. "I know, I just thought, I can handle my own stuff," I said again, my voice too defensive, too brittle. He nodded slowly, lips pressing together, and stepped back. Of course, I didn't mean to overstep. Then he turned and walked away, rain tapping on his umbrella. The moment he was gone, I wanted to take it all back. But something in me, the part that still flinched from depending on anyone, told me to stay silent. For the next few days, things felt different, awkward, like the air between our houses had thickened. No waves, no small talk, just polite distance. I missed him more than I wanted to admit. I kept seeing little reminders of him. The wooden keychain, the fixed table, the half-empty wine bottle we never finished. And every time I felt this ache that was part guilt, part fear. Because the truth was, Elias had gotten closer to me than anyone had in a long time. And that terrified me. Letting someone in meant giving them the power to leave, and I wasn't sure I was ready to risk that again. But one evening, a week later, I looked out my window and saw him sitting on his porch, reading, the light catching on the curve of his jaw. He looked peaceful, distant, and I realized something simple and painful. If I didn't fix this, I'd lose the one person who made this strange new place feel like home. It took me 3 tries to walk across the street. The first time I got as far as the front gate before turning back, heart racing. The second time I even made it down the path, but then panicked when I saw him through the window, sanding a piece of wood like nothing had happened. It wasn't until the third attempt, dusk settling into the corners of the sky, air smelling like rain again, that I finally found the courage to knock. He opened the door, surprised but calm. "Hey," he said softly, eyes searching my face. "Hi," I breathed, clutching the hem of my sweater. "Can we talk?" He hesitated just a second, then stepped aside. Yeah, come in. His house was exactly how I imagined. Warm light, soft music, the faint scent of sawdust and coffee. I stood there for a moment, trying to find words that didn't sound like excuses. I'm sorry, I said finally, for snapping at you. You didn't deserve that. Elias leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. It's okay. You were upset. No, it's not okay, I said, meeting his eyes. You were being kind and I pushed you away.
I'm not good at depending on people. It's stupid. I know.
He looked at me for a long moment, then set down the mug he was holding.
It's not stupid,
he said quietly. I get it. I've done the same thing. That caught me off guard. You have. He nodded. When you build things for a living, you start thinking you can fix everything yourself, including people. But sometimes you just can't. You have to let someone help you instead. There was a long pause, the kind that feels like it's holding something delicate. Then he smiled. Small but real. For what it's worth, I wasn't trying to fix you. I just wanted to be there. Something in me cracked open at that. I stepped closer and he didn't move away. Then, maybe I'll let you, I whispered. And he just nodded. No big gestures, no dramatic words, just quiet understanding. It was the simplest moment, but it felt like the beginning of something honest. After that night, everything shifted. Not suddenly, but in that slow, certain way the dawn replaces darkness. We began to spend more time together again, though it felt different now, deeper somehow. There was no pretending, no careful politeness. We both knew what sat quietly between us, even if neither of us said it out loud. He'd stop by in the mornings sometimes, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, saying he'd made too much. I'd roll my eyes but take it anyway, pretending not to notice that he remembered exactly how I liked it. A bit too sweet, a bit too milky. I started helping him with his projects, sanding planks of oak in his garage, as he showed me how to move with the grain, not against it. It was surprisingly meditative, the smell of wood, the hum of the radio, his voice low and warm beside me. Sometimes our hands brushed when passing tools, and neither of us pulled away as quickly as before. One evening, after hours of talking and laughing over nothing, I looked up at him. The way his smile started slow, the little crease by his left eye, the way he listened like every word mattered. And it just hit me. I was in love with him. Not the dizzy, heart in your throat kind I'd felt before, but something steadier, quieter, like finding the rhythm of your own breathing after holding it too long. It scared me, honestly. Love had always felt like fire, unpredictable, dangerous, but with Elias, it felt like warmth, like standing by a hearth on a cold night. That realization sat in my chest for days. I didn't say it aloud, but it colored everything, every look, every shared laugh, every quiet moment that stretched between us. Then one night, he walked me home after dinner, and we paused at my porch. The air smelled like rain again, and he was close enough that I could see the reflection of my porch light in his eyes. He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You look happy here." "I am," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You're part of that." He smiled then, that small meaningful one, and for the first time, it didn't feel like something unspoken hung between us. It felt like understanding. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that this was love. After that night on the porch, something in us shifted, not dramatically, but like a page quietly turning. We started to move through our days with a kind of gentle awareness of each other. He'd knock on my door with fresh bread he'd baked, or I'd leave little notes in his mailbox. "Your garden looks amazing," or "You left your screwdriver at my place again." "I'm starting to think it's an excuse." He always replied with a smiley face drawn in pencil. It wasn't official, no declarations, no labels, but everyone could see it. Even Mrs. Callahan from down the street winked at me once and said, "That neighbor of yours has kind eyes." I almost dropped my grocery bag. Elias and I fell into an easy rhythm. Weekends meant morning walks with Taffy, long talks about everything and nothing, and afternoons where he'd show me the progress on his furniture pieces. I'd tease him about how serious he looked when he measured things twice, and he'd just shake his head, pretending not to smile. But underneath all the laughter was this steady heartbeat of something real, something waiting to be acknowledged. One Friday evening, we were sitting on his porch, watching the sky fade into violet. He was quiet, unusually so, and after a while he said, You know, when you moved in, I thought you'd stay a few months, rent out the place, maybe move somewhere bigger. Most people don't stick around here. I turned to him, surprised. Did you want me to move? He looked at me then, really looked, and said no. I hoped you'd stay. It wasn't a confession, not exactly, but it felt like one. The kind that hums quietly between two people who already understand what's happening. And right then, under the soft glow of the porch light, I realized something simple but enormous. This wasn't just a nice connection or a friendly comfort. This was the beginning of a life I actually wanted to build, not around a place, but around a person. For a while everything felt almost too perfect, the kind of gentle happiness that makes you start glancing over your shoulder, waiting for something to go wrong. And maybe because I'd been hurt before, I started to do what I always do when things get too close. Overthink. It began with small things. One evening he didn't answer my text for a few hours, perfectly normal of course, but my brain spun it into something else. Then I noticed how quiet he got whenever I mentioned the future, how he'd deflect with a joke or change the subject. The doubts crept in quietly, like drafts under a door. One night, we were in his workshop, the scent of varnish and pine filling the air. He was sanding a chair, and I was perched on his workbench, watching, without really meaning to. I said, "Do you ever think about leaving this place, doing something else?" He paused, thoughtful. "Not really. I like it here." "I mean, what if something better comes along?" I asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Better than what?" I didn't answer. I think he saw the hesitation in my face, the way I suddenly looked away. The silence that followed was long, too long, until he said quietly, "You think I'd just leave?" I didn't say that. I said quickly, though I wasn't convincing either of us. He set down the sandpaper, leaning on the table. "I'm not him." That stopped me cold. We'd never talked about my ex directly, but he knew. The outlines, the wounds. "I know," I said softly. "But sometimes it still feels like everyone eventually does." Elias didn't reply right away. He just looked at me with that steady, patient gaze of his, then said, "Then maybe you just haven't had someone stay long enough yet." It should have comforted me. But instead I just felt exposed, scared. So I smiled too brightly, said something about needing air, and left. That night, lying in bed, I hated how easily my fear could twist something good into something fragile. And I wondered, just for a moment, if this was how love always tested you, by asking whether you trusted it enough to stay. The days after that conversation felt heavier, not because of anything either of us said, but because of everything we didn't. We still saw each other, still exchanged polite smiles across the fence, but the easy rhythm we'd built had cracked a little. There was a pause where laughter used to be. Words that once came so freely now felt like they had to pass through layers of hesitation. One afternoon I saw him loading wood into his truck. Normally, I would have wandered over to ask what he was working on, maybe steal a cup of his coffee, tease him about being a perfectionist, but I stayed on my porch pretending to check my phone. He looked up, saw me, and hesitated for half a second before giving a small, careful wave. It broke my heart more than I expected. At night, I'd catch myself staring at the wooden keychain he'd made me, running my thumb over the smooth edges. It was strange how something so small could hold so much meaning, and how, in its silence, it reminded me of what I was about to lose. A few days later, I decided to walk past his house just to feel near him, I guess. His porch light was on, but the curtains were drawn. For some reason, that small detail, the closed curtains, made me feel like I was on the outside of something I'd once been invited into. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and told myself to let it go. That maybe he'd grown tired of my walls. That maybe I wasn't meant to be someone's soft place after all. But that night, when I stepped out to bring in my mail, I found a folded piece of paper wedged in my doorframe. It was from him. "I don't know what I did wrong, but I miss talking to you." My hands shook a little as I read it. Because it wasn't him who'd done something wrong, it was me. And suddenly, the silence I'd built to protect myself felt a lot like loneliness. The next evening, I found myself walking across the street, note clutched in my hand like a lifeline. I didn't knock at first, just stood on his porch, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the nerves that had me buzzing like electricity. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his face softened immediately. "Hey," he said, quiet but warm. "Hey," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He stepped aside wordlessly, letting me in. The house smelled like cedar and coffee, like home. We sat on the porch swing, the one we'd spent hours on before, and I fumbled for words. "I'm sorry," I said finally, "for shutting you out, for letting my fears get in the way of whatever this is between us. I shouldn't have made it awkward." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "You didn't make it awkward," he said gently. "I just didn't want to push either. I thought maybe you needed space." "I did," I admitted. "But I also needed you to know that I care, more than I realized." He studied me for a long moment, then let out a small laugh. "You mean you care enough to nearly leave me hanging because of your fears?" I laughed nervously, shrugging. "Pretty much." He shook his head, smiling softly. "You're ridiculous. But I'm glad you're here." And just like that, the weight that had been between us seemed to lift. Not completely. Trust and understanding aren't rebuilt overnight, but enough that I could finally breathe again. I realized that love wasn't just about perfect timing or smooth conversations. Sometimes it was about showing up, even when you were scared, and I knew he'd do the same for me. After that evening, something shifted in the way we moved around each other. The cautious distance faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that we were both here to stay, not just in the neighborhood, but in each other's lives. We started sharing more than small talk or casual jokes. He invited me into his workshop fully this time, showing me the projects he'd been working on, explaining the details I'd never noticed before. A particular type of joint mattered, how the grain of the wood could change the whole feel of a piece. I listened, fascinated, but also aware of how much I wanted to be part of his world. I shared things too. Little stories from my childhood, dreams I'd never told anyone, fears I'd tucked away after heartbreaks, and he listened. Not just politely, but really listened, as if every word mattered. There was no judgment, no rush, just understanding. One afternoon, as we painted a set of chairs for his sister, our hands brushed, lingered, and we both laughed at the tension that had nothing to do with the paint. But that day, I realized that I no longer flinched at his closeness. I leaned in instead. It was a subtle, slow kind of intimacy. Shared glances, soft touches, inside jokes that no one else would understand. But it was ours. And it felt safe. And in that safety, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. The courage to truly open my heart. By the end of the week, I couldn't deny it any longer. I didn't just like Elias. I trusted him. I cared for him. I wanted him. In the simplest, truest sense. And I think he felt the same. It wasn't dramatic. No lightning strikes. No grand gestures. Just a quiet evening on my porch. The sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Taffy curled at our feet. We'd been talking about everything and nothing, laughing softly, when a comfortable silence settled over us. I turned to him, heart hammering, and realized I didn't want to hide it anymore. "Elias," I started, voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, curious, patient. I think I'm in love with you." The words felt fragile as they left my mouth, but the moment I said them I felt a kind of relief, as if a door I'd been guarding had finally opened. He blinked, then smiled. That small, knowing smile that reaches his eyes and warms the chest in ways words never could. "I was waiting for you to say that," he admitted softly. My stomach did a little flip. You feel the same," he nodded, stepping closer until the space between us disappeared. "Yes, I've felt it for a long time. I just wanted to make sure you were ready to hear it, and that it was really you, not just the idea of us." I laughed, partly from relief, partly from sheer happiness. "It's really me." He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers with mine, and in that quiet golden evening light, it finally felt real. Not a crush, not a fleeting infatuation, but a deep, steady, undeniable love. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need grand declarations or perfect timing. I just needed honesty, courage, and the man standing in front of me. After that night, everything between us felt both new and beautifully familiar, like we'd been quietly writing the same story for months, and had finally decided to read it out loud. We didn't rush into anything. There were no fireworks, no whirlwind romance. Instead, it was slow mornings and easy laughter, dinners cooked side by side, the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Sometimes he'd come over just to fix something that didn't really need fixing. A loose handle, a crooked shelf, and I'd tease him for looking for excuses to stay longer. He'd just grin and say, "Maybe I like your house better than mine." We started spending most evenings together. His porch or mine, it didn't matter. Taffy became a constant presence, sprawling between us like an oversized chaperone. On colder nights, Elias would drape his old gray sweater around my shoulders, and I'd wear it like it belonged to me. There were still moments of uncertainty. Love never erases fear completely, but they didn't scare me anymore. Because every time I started to doubt, he was there. Quiet, steady, real. One morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and cinnamon. When I stepped outside, he was waiting on my porch, 2 mugs in hand, that same soft smile on his face. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I echoed, still sleepy, heart full. And as I sat beside him, legs tucked under me, I realized that somewhere between that first awkward wave and this quiet sunrise, we'd built something that felt like home. Not the house, not the street, us. It's been a few months since that confession, and every day feels like a new chapter. I still find myself pausing on the porch, looking across the street at Elias tending his garden, and thinking, how did I get so lucky? We've started dreaming together, quietly, gently. Weekend trips we might take, small home projects we can tackle as a team, even discussions about what it would mean to truly share a life. Nothing is rushed. We move at a pace that feels natural, like the rhythm of our own heartbeat in sync. Sometimes I catch myself holding his hand in public and smiling to myself, just because it feels right. Sometimes I see him watching me, and I know he feels the same. There's no need for grand gestures or dramatic confessions anymore. We've learned that love is in the little things. The coffee in the morning, the shared glance across the table, the way he quietly fixes the loose screw on my favorite chair without asking. I've realized that falling in love isn't always about fireworks and heart-stopping moments. Sometimes it's about noticing someone, really seeing them, and slowly, imperceptibly, letting your heart follow. And now, as I stand on my porch at sunset, Taffy napping at our feet, and Elias smiles at me from across the way, I feel it in every fiber of my being. This is home. This is love. We don't know exactly what the future holds, but I do know one thing: whatever comes, we'll face it together. And somehow that makes the world feel infinitely brighter. I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes moving into a new place doesn't just mean finding a new home, it means finding someone worth building a life with. And I've found mine.